This is an historic moment from which there can be no turning back. Britain is leaving the European Union.
The argument to leave was passionate, divisive, and at times outlandish.
At the moment, we have no control over our borders.
And we will lose more control.
For the Leave camp, its narrow referendum victory was a vindication.
Independence!
For Europe and nearly half of UK voters, it was a cause of disbelief, with protests and calls for another vote. But after David Cameron fell on his sword,
I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction.
The new British Prime Minister Theresa May made the government's position clear.
Brexit means Brexit.
And the UK has now officially begun its Brexit from the European Union. Article 50 is a bit like a set of divorce papers. Triggering it starts the 2-year countdown to negotiate the UK's separation from the EU. European Council President Donald Tusk has said he will present draft Brexit guidelines to EU member states by Friday. One of the key issues will be working out the rights of UK citizens living in the EU and vice versa. And the UK will likely look to make a trade deal with the EU. The negotiations will take place between all EU members, and each will have the ability to veto conditions. There's concern the EU will take a tough stance to stop other dissatisfied members looking to stray. Even if they don't have a final agreement by April 2019, the UK will still have to leave, unless there's a unanimous agreement to wind back the clock. But Theresa May has said she's prepared to walk away if she doesn't get what she wants, saying that no deal for Britain is better than a bad deal for Britain.
There's no reason to pretend that this is a happy day, neither in Brussels nor in London.
Following the referendum, the EU asked the UK to make its exit swift and made it clear Britain wouldn't be getting any special treatment. But no member has ever triggered Article 50 before, so exit negotiations are uncharted territory, as is the impact someone leaving will have. And there's concern Brexit will threaten the EU's very existence. The UK is the bloc's second biggest economy, and there are fears there'll be a chain reaction of referendums to leave that could see the EU unravel.
We already miss you. Thank you and goodbye.
Now that the UK is officially on its way, does the EU need to urgently look at ways to reform? And what does this all mean for the UK on its own and the EU together? Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
To look at what's at stake, we're joined now by our guests from across the UK. In London, we have Robert Oulds. He's a Conservative councillor and the director of the Bruges Group, a pro-Brexit think tank. In southeastern England, in Canterbury, Richard Whitman. He's a politics professor at the University of Kent, and he heads up the Global Europe Centre, which looks at the EU's evolving relationship with the UK. And in Edinburgh, James Dorman, a member of Scotland's Parliament from the Scottish National Party, which strongly opposed Brexit. We'll have the view from Brussels later in the programme. Thanks so much, all of you, for joining us. Robert, let me begin with you. There's this talk of now being the moment for Britons to come together, for Prime Minister Theresa May to unite the country. But the reality is the country is deeply divided. This has been one of the most contentious issues in decades. How does it happen? How do you actually bring this country together when it's so deeply divided?
Well, first of all, it needs to be stated that according to the opinion polls, 2/3 of British people want Brexit to be got on with and delivered. So the country is mostly united behind Brexit. In Britain, having 66%, in some polls as much as 68%, wanting the government to get on and deliver Brexit is the biggest majority you can have for any political issue. The country is quite clearly united on Brexit.
Is the country...
That is a fact. Even in Scotland...
Okay, let me ask James Dornan then.
Even in Scotland...
Okay, you say even in Scotland. James Dornan, is the country united behind Brexit and they want to get on with it?
If 62 to 38 means that the country's united, then it's a form of unity that I don't recognise. The clear fact is that Scotland overwhelmingly voted to leave to remain in the European Union, and the wishes of the people of Scotland have been completely discarded by Theresa May. I nearly said Maggie Thatcher there, but it's an easy mistake to make. Theresa May and her gung-ho attitude. For a Remainer who wants to prove herself to be an extreme leaver, her gung-ho attitude to the people of Scotland and making sure that the UK leaves Brexit no matter what the cost.
Richard Whitman, let me throw to you what the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, said. He said there's no reason to pretend that this is a happy day, neither in Brussels nor in London. And he also said, you know, Britain, we already miss you, thank you and goodbye. What did you make of what he said?
Well, it's not thank you and goodbye yet, of course, because we're about to embark on this 2-year process of negotiating exit from the European Union. So the UK is going to be around for a while yet within the EU. But I think what was interesting was the fact that he sort of started off with a sort of regretful sentiment, because a lot of what we've heard so far from Brussels has suggested that the EU wants to play hardball, but even suggestions that the UK should be in some way punished for seeking to exit the EU. And I think what we're now at is a moment where there's a kind of recalibration, a sort of stepping back perhaps from some of the public statements, because we're now about to embark on what's going to be a lengthy, detailed and incredibly complicated process of pulling apart the relationship between the UK and the EU.
Robert, if the EU does want to play hardball, and it might want to, they have every right to, right? You can't ask for a divorce and then still want all the rights that you had in the marriage.
Well, there's other agreements that sit above the European Union. To think that trade would cease when Britain leaves the European Union between Britain and what remains of the EU is just completely false. There are international agreements. There's the WTO technical agreement dealing with technical barriers to trade. Basically, trade will continue. We'll still continue to cooperate with the European Union, but we'll do so as an independent country. Most countries in the world trade with the European Union, but they do so on terms either that they've negotiated themselves without having the enormous cost of the European Union in terms of its financial cost and the regulatory cost, but they'll do so either on special terms that they've negotiated or on world terms. And countries like China, the United States, they sell more.
Robert, sorry to interrupt you. Let me ask you this question
than Britain does.
So let me ask this from a different direction. Let me ask it in another way, from a different direction. From the European perspective, if they give Britain a good deal, that means that you can break away and get a great deal. That means anyone can break away and get a great deal. It means there's no more Europe. They'd be absolutely suicidal to do so. Do you accept that they're going to play hardball as a result of that? Because you can't just leave and expect to have all the rights that you had beforehand, or maybe even more, and there's nothing then to gain from the EU's perspective.
The worst deal is being a member of the European Union, and countries are finding out that through their membership of the EU, the enormous costs that places, particularly membership of the euro, the single currency, that they are going to have to leave. Countries like Italy, Greece, eventually they'll have to leave the EU setup because they are just failing inside the European Union. It is destroying jobs. So they can perhaps try and think about putting some restrictive measures on Britain. They'll soon find out that they can't do so legally because the EU is bound by its own rules to have its markets open to neighbouring countries. Its own regulations regarding financial services would give Britain access to their markets because we have equivalence already. And WTO rules means you can't keep someone out if you have international standards.
You've mentioned a
Britain
bunch
already
of...
follows international standards.
Sure.
The European Union does not have the power to undermine us, and they don't have the ability either,
maybe
because
they don't want
to lurching from one crisis to another.
Sure, but maybe they don't want to undermine you. Maybe they just want to get the best deal for themselves, is what I'm trying to get at. James, 8 months on, have you been convinced in any way, shape or form that this hasn't been the economic apocalypse that some people had feared, and that maybe Brexit might be a decent thing and a stable thing for the economy?
Not in the slightest. I listened to Robert there, and it's a land of hope and glory speech. The reality is that the Fraser of Allender Institute says that the Brexit would cost 80,000 Scottish jobs and £2,000 per head of the population. And that is a bit of a price to pay for an internal Conservative battle, which is, at the end of the day, that's what this was all about. And there has been nothing.
Separation from the rest of the UK will cost jobs in Scotland.
Because there has been absolutely no information from the Westminster government to tell us what sort of Brexit they're going to get? How could we possibly then make a decision that this Brexit is going to be good for us if we don't know what the UK government are looking for or what the EU is likely to give? And let's be honest here, the EU will maybe not play hardball, but they will be firm with the UK for two reasons. One is because they have to look after their own members, and the other is they also have to send out that message.
OK, Richard Whitman, given the privilege of hindsight, given that Article 50 has been triggered many months on after the actual vote, and given all the available indications that we have from the Prime Minister and others, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the economy in the UK now that it's going to break away?
Well, I think we haven't yet really seen the effects of Brexit because, you know, the fundamental terms of trade between the UK and the EU are unaltered. Perhaps the only question is business confidence and the extent to which business confidence has picked up since the vote, and that's true. But of course, the UK is also at the moment lumbering under an exchange rate issue. Its exchange rate for the dollar, the pound having weakened against the dollar and also weakened against the euro, which is a double-edged sword because it's been good for some exporters, but it's also leading to rising inflation.
Pound is up today.
Yeah, but I mean, the pound has ticked up a little bit. It's nowhere back to where it was before we had the vote in June. But I mean, that's, you know, the pound has beneficial effects for some sectors of the economy, but it doesn't have beneficial effects overall. And if there is a benefit for the UK from where the pound is at the moment, that we're going to see somewhat down the road because, of course, exporters have to adjust and so on. But I think the real question for most businesses is going to be certainty, and to have a sense that the UK, even as it's leaving the European Union, is moving into a relationship with the EU, which is clear quite a way ahead of time. I mean, what we don't want to do is to be 18 months, 2 years down the road, and we still have uncertainty as to exactly what the form of economic relationship or trading relationship is going to be between the UK.
Robert, and as Richard said, real question is uncertainty. Lots of uncertainty for people who are working in the UK, people who want to go to the UK, British citizens who are currently on the European mainland and so on. Immigration was a major issue for Brexit voters. They wanted their country to be tough on immigration. Is that how it's going to play out, or are we going to see something much softer than what was expected during the build-up to the vote?
Just like to come back to the previous point about Britain getting a bad deal from the EU to keep other nations in the European Union. What does it say about the European Union if they have to give a deal to Britain that would actually damage their own interests to keep other nations locked inside the European Union? Clearly, there's nothing good about the European Union. That's why in the referendum campaign, all we heard was scare stories about how the world would come to an end if we voted to exit the European Union.
Sure, but we also heard that 75 million Turks would be invading Britain. We also heard that 350 million pounds every week would be going to the NHS. So everybody had scare stories. I don't want to kind of revisit all of these now. Immigration. Is this government going to be tough on immigration, Robert?
This government will, I'm sure, guarantee the EU citizens within the UK their existing rights. My understanding, and something that I've wrote about at length, is that actually British citizens living on the continent, European Union citizens living within the UK have their rights protected. That's a matter under international law. They've executed those rights. They've acquired these rights. Their status will not change. They'll have the same rights. So basically, Britain will be open to the existing people that have come here to live, to work, just like other Britons have gone to the continent. Their rights will be protected. So that is something that I am very confident will happen. The reason why this hasn't been agreed as yet is because the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, said no. When Theresa May said, let's just wrap this one issue up now, let's give equal rights for people who reside in each other's countries.
And there's going to be 2 years of negotiations.
Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, rejected it.
Okay.